Hello, everyone. Uh, Very good afternoon from Thailand. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Pulbal Hendu, and I'll be moderator for this session today. I work here at the Regional Resource Center for Asia and Pacific at the Asian Institute of Technology based here in Thailand. And I, on behalf of our center, would like to thank you all for joining this webinar on showcasing leading nature-based solution experience from Asia and Europe. I would also like to thank our distinguished speakers for being able to find the time in sharing their knowledge with us today. And also, we would like to extend our gratitude to Ministry of Environment, Government of Japan for financially supporting this webinar, and also our climate change cluster as a whole. As you might have already read in our announcement, that the primary goal of this webinar is to share knowledge and experience in the field of nature-based solution application in order to facilitate effective uptake of knowledge and contribution to a higher level of coordination among different institutional levels. Today, our distinguished speakers will share various lessons and approaches from some of Asia's and Europe's leading nature-based solutions projects. We hope this webinar will broaden the exchange of knowledge across communities, resulting in more effective nature-based solutions project development in the future for every one of us. This webinar will consist of 5 presentations and will take 120 minutes approximately. The speakers will be introduced as we go on with presentations. For your information, the recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel after a few days, so you are free to visit. And then the presentation files will be shared based on your request. So if you need, please visit our webinar announcement. I'm referring to this webinar announcement and contact the focal person. All the questions will be addressed during the Q&A sessions at the end of the presentations. So please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. We will collect them and try to address them, but would like to apologize in advance in case we ran out of time. I would like to request all the speakers to answer the questions directly in the Q&A box if you feel so. And at the end of the session, we'll have a short online evaluation form that we would request you to kindly fill in to let us know if it was helpful for you and to what extent and how we could improve further. And now, without further ado, I would like to start this webinar by inviting our director of our center, Dr. Naoya Tsukamoto, to kindly welcome the participants. By the way, his brief bio data will be posted in the chat box for your information. So I would like to hand over this floor to our director.
Thank you very much, Purva. Ms. Yoshida, Ms. Yuko Yoshida, Deputy Director, Climate Change Adaptation Office, Global Environmental Bureau of the Ministry of the Environment of Japan. Professor Takehito Yoshida, Associate Professor, Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, University of Tokyo. Dr. Mario Balzan, Applied Ecologist, Malta College of Art, Science and Technology, Coordinator of the ReNature EU Horizon 2020 project. Dr. Nob Wangdi, Project Coordinator, the Royal Society for the Protection of Nature, Bhutan. Mr. Joost Noordermeyer, Coastal Engineering Team Lead, Witwin plus Bos, Jakarta, Indonesia. Mr. Rafael Glamet, Senior Program Officer, Water and Wetland, IUCN Asia Regional Office, Bangkok. Distinguished participants, colleagues, on behalf of the Regional Center for the Asia and the Pacific, please let me express my deep gratitude to your contribution and participation today. RRCAP was established 31 years ago as a joint initiative of both the Asian Institute of Technology and the UN Environment, aiming to bridge the gap between the scientific understanding of sustainable development processes and sound policies and natural and regional levels. Acting as a science policy platform through regional networking, RRCAP has been providing capacity building knowledge, sharing, policy development, support for our stakeholders in Asia and the region. And the Ministry of the Environment of Japan kindly supports our activities. Let me talk briefly about adaptation. Thanks to the continuous efforts of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, we have confident scientific knowledge that should be the sound basis of our decision-making. The global warming impacts of greenhouse gases have huge inertia, meaning that even if we have completely stopped the emission of greenhouse gases now, the global temperatures still continue to rise in decades, and the sea level rises in centuries. Thus, we need to prepare. The damages of natural disaster will become bigger and bigger by year and year, in according to the temperature rise. Thus, we need to prepare. Adaptation should be integrated in all the area of development, arising from agriculture, fishery, forest management, coastal management, river basin management, city planning, infrastructure building, etc. Unfortunately, we do not have enough budget for them. Thus, we need to rely on our existing resources. What it is? What I mean is the natural capital that has been neglected by the modern capitalism. Actually, the nature has been demonstrating its huge potential to help us adapt to the climate change and its impacts. I hope that you can touch on its fringes during our webinar today. Thank you very much for your attention, and please enjoy our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Nao-san, for your welcome address. And now next speaker, I have the pleasure of inviting Ms. Yuki Yoshida, who is the Deputy Director, Climate Change Adaptation Office, Global Environment Bureau, Ministry of Environment, Government of Japan, for the opening remarks. Ms. Yoshida, in her capacity as a Deputy Director, focuses on strengthening international collaboration with multiple stakeholders to facilitate adaptation actions in Asia-Pacific region. So I would like to invite Ms. Yuki Yoshida for the opening remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Fuba-san. It's my pleasure to hold opening remarks here at this event, and we are pleased to see AIT actively provide many kinds of capacity development programs in this Asia-Pacific region. So nature-based solutions are concepts which include various measures that measures our social challenges such as climate change, natural disasters, food security, human health, water security, and economic and social development by combining human well-being and biodiversity benefits. The importance of NBS has been recognized under UNFCCC, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and other frameworks. In addition, it's considered as a key element for green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic by many countries. In Japan, NBS is a key in the context of disaster risk reduction, green infrastructure, and transformative change for sustainable society. Many of our international support to the developing countries also consider NBS as a vital tool in achieving the SDGs, including post-COVID-19 recovery plans. We know that every year, natural disasters affect millions of our lives and livelihood across the world, causing displacement and socio-economic disruption that undermines our efforts in achieving the SDGs. Now there are enough scientific findings telling us that climate change and ecosystem degradation exacerbate these disasters. So, understanding, managing, and reducing disaster risks provide a foundation to build our resilience through maintaining healthy ecosystems which act as a buffer against hazards and impacts of climate change. The UN calls that we are facing a triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. In this context, NBS is a powerful approach to address these crises. We believe that the applications of NBS, which is exactly what you will learn from today's webinar, can be replicated or scaled up in other areas. Finally, the growing momentum for NBS provides an important opportunity to reframe the incorrect understanding of our relationship with nature and to emphasize how people are part of nature. By improving our relationship with nature, we can find a way to meet our needs, including protecting our health without jeopardizing biodiversity or the health of the planet. It will provide a win-win solution for not only nature conservation in response to climate change and biodiversity loss, but it will also be effective tool for a green economic revival, delivering direct benefits to people. As the world's priority shifts towards green recovery and green economic development, now it's the time to act. So I wish all the participants a good luck with the webinar, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yoshida-san, for your opening remarks. And now may I request all the panelists to put on your camera and come on the screen for, now we should call it a group photo, but it will be a screenshot. So I would appreciate if you could put in, because yeah, it's good to have everyone in one screen. Okay, thank you so much for coming on the camera. So this is just for a photo session, and also for the participants to see us, who are the panelists and the speakers. So thank you so much for this session. And now we will start the webinar now, start the presentation. So the first presentation we have today is from Japan, and it comes from Professor Tatsuhito Yoshida, who is the Associate Professor at the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature and University of Tokyo. And for your information, he is an ecologist and limnologist who studies the diversity and complexity of organisms and ecosystems in relation to adaptation, system dynamics, and explore human-nature interaction and sustainability in local communities in Japan. For further details, you can see his details in the chat box. And his presentation today will be on nature-based solutions for disaster risks in Japan, traditional knowledge, and transdisciplinary approaches. So I would like to request Professor to take the floor, and we will be showing his, we will be displaying his presentation from our side.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Takehito Yoshida from the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, which is called RIN in short, and University of Tokyo. I'm jointly affiliated with these two institutes. Today, I'm going to talk about the nature-based solutions for disaster risks in Japan. Some example, not all the examples we can find in nature, but only the two examples I'm going to talk about, but especially focusing on the traditional knowledge relating those nature-based solutions and the transdisciplinary approaches, how to utilize this knowledge in the to solve the actual problems on the ground. I want to next slide, please. Well, Japan is one of the countries where disasters occur very frequently. Heavy rain during the rainy season. We are right after the rainy season, but still we have the heavy rain events recently. But heavy rains caused by the rainy season, and also brought by the typhoons in the autumn season, caused devastating floods and landslides in many parts of Japan. For example, in 2018, This photograph shows the heavy rain at the end of the rainy season caused devastating damages by floods and landslides in the western part of Japan, which killed more than 200 people and injured people and more close to the 400, and more than 15,000 houses are damaged. So in recent years, disasters like this devastating one occurs almost every year in some places in Japan. And also there's a prediction that ongoing climate change is predicted to cause more disasters in the future. Next, please. Next, please. Can you move to the next? Thank you very much. As countermeasures against these disasters, a large number of infrastructure for flood control and sediment control have been constructed using the modern engineering technologies. And actually these infrastructure, such as large dams and concrete levees, prevented or reduced damage caused by disasters, but not all disasters in all cases. Also, they sometimes create trade-offs between disaster risk reduction and the functions of nature and natural and human systems. Next, please. But if you look at the history of Japan, humans have long traditions to cope with disasters before the modern engineering technologies developed, as in young countries. And traditional knowledge tells us how to reduce disaster risks and benefit from nature's blessings or ecosystem services at the same time. And these traditional knowledge can be still found in many parts of Japan, many places in Japan, although they are actually declining in many places. We might have lost already some of them. In our research project conducted in the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, LIN, we are publishing the series of booklets that introduce the traditional knowledge of the disaster risk reduction in both in Japanese language and in English. We have published 3 booklets so far in Japanese and 2 booklets in English, and these booklets are freely available from the internet through the LIN website. So if you are interested in these examples in Japan, please visit the LIN website to find more information. And I will talk about some example from this work today. Next, please. One example showing the traditional knowledge of disaster risk reduction is from Hira Mountains, Hira Sanchi in Japanese, of the Shiga Prefecture, which is located at the west side of the Lake Biwa, which is the largest lake located at the central part of Japan. Here, landslides and mud floods descending the steep slopes of the Hira Mountains caused disasters, as the hazard map shows in the right-hand side. The yellow areas at the foot of the mountains means the potential risks of landslides and mud floods. Next, please. And this region, we have lots of the historical records accumulated, and these historical records are kept by the local community and analyzed by the member of the research team. These records show the repeated occurrence of landslides and mud floods caused by heavy rains. For example, a whole village was swept away by the landslides and mud floods in 1692. And after that, there are also the landslide and mudflow events that caused devastating impacts on the local communities. Next page, please. Landslides and mudflows also provide stones as local resource by scratching the mountains and leveling the stones from the mountain's top to the bottom of the mountains. And these stones are used to make stone walls, including the huge ones, which is called hyakkenzutsuми, that in Japanese, that literally means 180-meter long levees made by the piled stones of the huge size. And these stones can prevent or reduce damages by landslides and landfalls. And also, if you look at the light low photographs, you can see the forest. These forests, the picture of the photographs is actually taken in the winter, so it's really bright. But in summer season, it's really dark because of the leaves on the trees. But the forests are used to buffer landslides and mud flows, and at the same time providing the habitats for diverse plants and butterflies and other organisms, animals. The stone walls and the buffering forests have long been used in this area, representing the traditional knowledge of the local nature. The next, please. And high quality stone materials, which is made of the granite and the chert, which is a kind of the sedimentary rock, delivered by the landslides and that support the local traditional industry. These illustrations are based on the interviews of the senior stonemasons that shows how stone materials were delivered from the mountains and cut and processed at the local workshops and finally shipped to the different places on the Lake Biwa using the ships. Next, please. The local stone culture characterizes the scenic beauty of the local community, including houses. You can see the top left photograph showing the chart. The one of the sedimentary rock is used as a part of the gardens, and you can see the huge guardian dog, and huge the garden lanterns that is made of the granite stone. And these stone crafts are also used in the famous Japanese gardens in Kyoto, which is next to the Shiga Prefecture, and other places. Next, please. And the understanding of the interlinkage among the disasters, local stone resource, and forest ecosystems was shared among local actors by organizing workshops and field tours, which promotes the passing down the traditional knowledge. And in this, the transdisciplinary platform, the exchanging narratives by local actors is really important for mutual understanding and transferring the traditional knowledge. Next, please. The other example I want to talk today is from the Mikata-Goko Lakes area in Fukui Prefecture, which is located north of the Shiga Prefecture of the previous example. In this area, floods due to heavy rain occurs frequently. For example, in 2013, there was a typhoon hit this area that caused a record-breaking rainfall and inundation of the flood and damages like this the newspaper is reporting. Next, please. And if we look at the historical records of the disaster in this area, which is collected and archived by the local museums, and these historical records shows the repeated occurrence of the flood in this area from the ancient times. But in recent years, these floods occur every 5 years on average. Next, please. What if you look at the photographs that I showed previously more closely, the traditional land use helps to reduce inundation damages. Like this, the houses, the bridges, houses in the bridges are located at a slightly elevated areas to avoid inundation. But on the other hand, flooded areas that looks like the part of a lake is mostly used at the paddy fields. Next, please. And these paddy fields provide habitats for fish and other aquatic organisms like frogs and dragonflies, contributing to the biodiversity conservation. And this fish is caught by the local fishermen using the traditional sustainable techniques. By the way, the systems of these traditional fisheries is registered as a Japanese nationally important agricultural heritage system, which is a domestic version of the GIAS. And next, please. These fish supplies various ecosystem services, including local food culture during the winter season, and that also support the local tourism. Sashimi or miso soup or the stewed fish. It's very famous in this area during the winter season. Next, please. I also want to emphasize that local traditional knowledge has been shared among diverse actors in this area through a transdisciplinary platform which is the Mikatagoko Nature Restoration Committee, where the diverse actors discuss and collaborate for actual solutions, actions on the ground. Here is also the exchanging the narratives by diverse actors, the key for mutual understanding that support the consensus building and creating the guideline for restoration based on the traditional knowledge. Okay, next please. So this summarizes my talk. Those disasters and ecosystem services are interdependent. They are not. They don't exist by themselves, but they are inseparable. So both the positive side and negative side of nature, what nature provides us. This ambiguity of nature, I call, is innate to the human-nature interactions, and there is a plentiful the traditional knowledge associated with this ambiguity of nature that has been passed down from generation to generation, but indeed it's declining in local communities. The cooperation and collaboration by diverse actors are very crucial for recognizing and using these traditional knowledge for the actual nature solutions on the ground. Thank you very much. That is closing my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your wonderful presentation, for sharing your experience from Japan. And participants, if you have any questions, please post in the Q&A chat box so that we'll be able to filter it out later for our session. So the next presentation, I would like to invite Dr. Mario Balzan, who is an applied ecologist at the Malta College of Arts, Science and Technology. He currently lectures in ecology, sustainable development, and environmental engineering, and is the founder of EcoStack Innovations, an environmental and innovation firm providing expertise in ecology and sustainable topics. He was the coordinator of the Renature EU Horizon 2020 project, which established a strategy to promote research and innovation for nature-based solutions that improves human well-being while tackling environmental challenges in Malta. For more information, please check your chat box on his detailed bio. So his presentation will be on developing collaborations for nature-based solutions, lessons learned from the EU Renature project. And for your information, this EU Renature project is one of the biggest projects that EU has funded so far on nature-based solutions. So let's hear from Dr. Mario. I think you are muted or...
Apologies for this. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for having me as part of this list of distinguished speakers. So yes, I was the coordinator of the Renature project. Renature was meant at developing collaborations for nature-based solutions. So essentially, it was focusing on developing capacity within institutions to increase the uptake of nature-based solutions and to come up with more effective nature-based solutions. I'd like to start with a definition of what exactly nature-based solutions are. We've heard already about nature-based solutions, but this is the IUCN definition, and so it's actions to protect, sustainably use, manage, and restore nature, or modified ecosystems, and address societal challenges effectively, adaptively, and providing benefits to well-being and to biodiversity. So essentially, what basically nature-based solutions are is one of the key aspects basically is that they address specific societal challenges, and at the same time lead to benefits to biodiversity and to well-being using nature. This project focused on developing capacity in Malta, and a small island state, the smallest member state of the European Union, by developing collaborations with other European countries. We try to work also within the context of Mediterranean cities and the Mediterranean climate. We know, for example, that the Mediterranean region is a hotspot of climate change, where the climate change impacts are quite big, as a consequence, for example, of the rapid increase in the average temperature within the region. So nature-based solutions is a way of using nature to address some of these challenges that we are speaking about. In Renature, we did not really implement specific nature-based solutions, but the focus here was on bringing stakeholders together on capacity building, developing participatory processes, and identifying knowledge gaps which can be tackled through research and through innovation. And this is more or less the format, the sort of cycle that we followed. Okay, so we worked a lot on the lower part of this cycle, on evaluating societal challenges through data collection, collation, through the carrying out of ecosystem service assessments. I'm not going to talk a lot about this today because in my limited time, I want to speak about the knowledge synthesis approaches, how we brought stakeholders together, the capacity building approaches, and also how we shared experience through a dedicated nature-based solutions compendium and toolkits. I focus on these aspects because I think it's also quite relevant for the objective of this webinar, basically. So this framework was sort of established within an objective of capacity building communities. So what we try to do is to involve communities and capacity build communities to understand what nature-based solutions are, to see where there are the gaps, and to try to tackle these gaps through research and through innovation. So the first thing that I'm going to share with you is a few photos from this event. In Renature, we have carried out a number of training activities. This started before the COVID pandemic, so we were meeting very much in person before that, and continued during the COVID pandemic. So we had to move online during the pandemic. But basically, as you can see here, there have been a number of training events, so 5 training courses where we brought stakeholders together in one room, and later for the last training course online, to learn about nature-based solutions. And we focus on different aspects, going from, for example, biodiversity monitoring, to ecosystem service assessments, to landscape planning, to decision-making processes, and so on. Okay, and we had 2 PhD summer schools. So what we did there was actually we also focused on the early career researchers by bringing PhD students and early postdoc researchers to our summer schools in Malta. And through this, we have actually trained a very large community of young people, researchers, and also our network. Okay, so 175 trainees participated for the in-person trainings. 201 trainees participated in the online webinar and training course. We also did two knowledge synthesis on which I'm going to speak very shortly on identifying the gaps for nature-based solutions uptake, and the second one on mainstreaming nature-based solutions in urban planning. We also developed a cluster of stakeholders working or interested in working on nature-based solutions. Okay, and finally, we also shared experiences of nature-based solutions from the region in a dedicated Renature compendium and interactive toolkits. And this is, I'm going to speak a bit about the compendium now. The Renature compendium basically is a repository, a repository of case studies from across the region. From really, we did not focus on the region, but we focused on having on case studies having a Mediterranean climate, because we felt that this is one of the challenges. So we see a lot of research going on in Northern Europe, in several parts of Europe on nature-based solutions, but one of the key gaps, I'm going to speak later on, is actually having nature-based solutions that are adapted to a local climate. And in this case, the local climate is the Mediterranean climate, and that is sort of a similarity between the case studies that we have collected. It's an open access compendium, so that it is available. The way it was developed, basically, we followed two steps. We collected case studies from Malta first, because we were interested in the local case studies, and then expanded the call for case studies to the Mediterranean region, but also, as I was saying before, to countries having a Mediterranean climate. And in fact, we also have case studies, for example, from the US, where there is, in particular contexts where there is a Mediterranean climate. This is a screenshot of the compendium. Of course, you can go there, you can click on it, and you can identify case studies. And for each case study, we collected specific data, of which only part is actually shown on the compendium, because for presentation purposes, we try to make the case study succinct enough, and also at the same time providing the required detail. But this is again a screenshot, but if you go on the compendium website, you can click on it and find specific case studies, the website source, and also the kind of challenges that are tackled. So the challenges tackled, the arising co-benefits, and also the SDGs addressed. You will also find more information about the case study itself, so where it was done, the context, the population, if it's in a city, for example, the time frame, the budget, the funder, and so on. And then, so we then eventually developed a database of 96 case studies, and this allowed us to sort of look at the type of nature-based solutions that are being implemented or that are being shared with us, after all, and the kind of challenges that these are tackling. What you're seeing now is a heat map, basically, and it is showing where it is dark. The color which is darker means that there are many case studies which are using that nature-based solutions. The nature-based solutions are shown on the x-axis. So you have building scale, so this includes green roofs, for example, and green walls, interventions in public spaces, interventions in water bodies, transport infrastructure, such as greening streets and main roads and highways and so on, natural areas and land management. So this is more focusing on land management and the management of natural areas and agricultural areas. And finally, education and participation. We use this categorization of nature-based solutions. And then on the y-axis here, you have the societal challenges that are tackled using nature-based solutions. Sort of the problems which are being tackled through nature-based solutions. And you can see from this heat map that there's some boxes which are dark brown, and these are where the experiences are. So there's many case studies, for example, focusing on using natural areas and land management, or carrying out interventions in natural areas and land management to tackle the issue of drought and heat risk in the Mediterranean climate, or to tackle the issue of biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation. Okay, but as you can see from this heat map, many of the sort of social aspects, social society challenges like local unemployment, for example, or low participation of communities, are not really tackled through nature-based solutions. And it's not just that. Even when you look at the sort of regulating services and benefits, like for example, tackling flood risk or also some of the goods, for example, arising from nature-based solutions like food, for example, and so on, we did not really find a lot of case studies for this. So this sort of is showing that there are some strong experiences in using particular nature-based solutions, but there are also many gaps in terms of implementation, in terms of using nature-based solutions to tackle some of the societal challenges. We did the same thing with benefits. Here, the color is different. Now it's green to show differences, basically, but it's the same sort of, we interpret this in the same way as the previous heat map, okay? It's a bit darker, showing that actually there's more benefits which are identified and linked to different nature-based solutions. But still, there are also some white boxes where we don't really have a lot of experience with that. And again, the social aspect here, ownership, green jobs, for example, is not really tackled through nature-based solutions. You see also here, water quality is sort of appear to be a gap, so where we don't have a lot of case studies, and transport infrastructure. So the use of nature-based solutions in transport infrastructure. This was also sort of one of the surprises that we did not really find a lot of case studies integrating transport. So, and it seems to me that maybe there's a lot of focus on managing transport and traffic in cities, but there's not really that integration between these two different sectors. I'm going to talk about this later on as well. And we also focus on SDGs. Again, here you can see that there's a lot of focus on some of the sort of key SDGs, SDG 3, SDG 13, 11, and 15. But the other SDGs are not really tackled through nature-based solutions. So although we talk about the multifunctionality of nature-based solutions and the importance of using nature-based solutions as a way to tackle, sort of to address the different SDGs, our research in nature basically is showing that there are gaps. Okay, we cannot be representative of all the Mediterranean here or all the case studies from Mediterranean climate, but our data is showing basically that there are some strengths, but also there are gaps in implementation and in the use of nature-based solutions to give benefits which are outside of the sort of traditional way of thinking about nature-based solutions. We also looked at, I'm not sure if you can see this really well in the slide, depends really on your screen, but we also looked at the country, so where the case studies were coming from, and how this affected the experience. And as you can see, this is like an ordination, basically, but where we use country as an explanatory variable. You can see that there are overlaps, but sort of the case studies coming from different countries tend to tackle also to a certain extent different aspects, which goes to show that projects like this that bring the international community together to share experiences can enable learning. And this also came out from interviews which we did from stakeholders, and which is not directly shown here, but basically showcasing experience from similar climates, tackling similar challenges, sort of creates an opportunity for learning by comparison, and also because we're sharing. While sort of addressing privacy issues, we're also sharing who the initiator is and who the sort of authority which leads it is. We're also developing the regional network and developing its capacity basically to share experiences to implement nature-based solutions, basically. We also use these case studies to sort of showcase what there is. So we developed an interactive toolkit where you can basically go online. There's the website there at the bottom of the slide. You can basically go online, click on the challenges, okay, that you want to address in your city or in a particular place. And when you click on it and then submit, it will tell you where we have a lot of experience with using nature-based solutions to tackle specific societal challenges and where the gaps are. So in our case, in our compendium, as I was saying before, the drought and heat risk was very much tackled with quite a large number of nature-based solutions categories, as you can see. So it's shown here: building scale interventions in public spaces, and so on. These are all in green. Here we follow the traffic lights color. If it's green, it means that there are many case studies tackling drought and heat risk to nature-based solutions. If it's orange, there's a bit less. If it's red, then we don't really have a lot of experiences with this. You can really find more about the toolkit from the website. But this basically is a way in which we have sort of tried to make these experiences available to communities, showing where there are positive experiences with using nature-based solutions to address specific societal challenges. And then when you click on the interventions, it will give you case studies. So anyone interested in using nature-based solutions in their own city, in their own area, can actually click on the intervention, click on the sort of challenges that are being addressed, or the benefits that sort of one is interested in having through a nature-based solution, and it will give you the most well-adapted nature-based solutions according to the data that we have, as I was saying before. So apart from sharing experiences, we also brought together stakeholders for knowledge synthesis exercises work. One of them was actually focusing on identifying the top knowledge needs to improve nature-based solutions. And this followed the Delphi survey. So we brought together stakeholders in a number of iterative sort of cycles, first online, and then eventually a workshop, which is shown here. This workshop was led by Dr. Lynn Diggs from the University of Cambridge. And through this Delphi approach, we identified top knowledge needs, basically. And our stakeholders, were not just coming from one country, they were coming from Mediterranean islands, because we want to tackle the similarities between Mediterranean islands and sort of what they are finding as a gap, limiting nature-based solution uptake. But as you can see here, the top knowledge need was, what exactly are nature-based solutions? Okay, so what are nature-based solutions? It appears to us that there's a lot of research going on in scientific work, but maybe the way we go from scientific work to policy and decision making, there is a gap there which needs to be tackled. As I was saying before, the adaptability to Mediterranean conditions is one of the top knowledge needs. So, okay, we want to implement nature-based solutions, but how do we adapt these to Mediterranean conditions? How do we, and as you can see later on, integrate these in urban plans? How do we retrofit this in places where there is no space for green infrastructure for nature-based solutions? And finally, the last knowledge need was actually the cost benefits. What are the costs and the benefits of having, in this case, urban green spaces, you know? So this was coming out quite a lot. We have a list of 47 knowledge needs, but I'm here only showing the sort of top 5, the ones which were top ranked by our community. So this is my last slide. I'm aware that my time is running out. And we also did interviews, and there's a publication which is focusing on this. We did interviews with stakeholders and asked them sort of about the barriers and opportunities for nature-based solutions implementation at sort of a national scale, because we spoke a lot at the regional scale, but also at the national scale, because decision-making often happens at the national scale. And here you see some of the barriers and enablers. The barriers are shown in red, and the enablers are shown in green. Well, the work going on at regional level is sort of important, and that is considered as being useful in guiding what is happening at the local scale. So it's an enabler. Public support, financing mechanism, and tools appear to be there. But then when you go for implementation, so access to financial tool, having support, political support by local stakeholders, the participation of communities, the lack of capacities of institutions to use and to implement, to understand, first of all, and then implement nature-based solutions. The cost, as I was saying before, the lack of standards to implement nature-based solutions. So these appear to be quite significant barriers that limit nature-based solutions uptake. We also talk about this in the knowledge dimension. So there, research and innovation, but really experimentation with nature-based solutions, having case studies like the ones I mentioned before, which try out new things, is very useful because it brings stakeholders together and it addresses some of these knowledge gaps that I was mentioning before. But there's limitations regarding the cost effectiveness, as I was saying. What are the benefits and what are the costs? Okay, and how can we address the trade-offs arising from nature-based solutions implementation? how can we address these? So these were some of the barriers which were identified by our stakeholders, barriers and enablers. So in summary, what if I had to summarize is the experience in nature, it's basically that there's very good experience with nature-based solutions in tackling particular challenges and giving rise to benefits to biodiversity and well-being, but there's also gaps in implementation, which might limit our ability to increase the uptake of more multifunctional nature-based solutions. And the way we have tackled this in the nature is actually by bringing communities together, hence also the title of this presentation. It's focusing on bringing communities together, learning, and also increasing the capacity of communities through collaboration and also training activities that I have mentioned earlier on. With that, this is my last slide. I'll share with you a photo from one of our summer school activities with students. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mario, for your wonderful presentation with your experience and knowledge from the EU Renature project. And also thank you for sharing some of the reference documents, including the toolkits, I think, which will be very useful for our participants. And we have just posted the links there in the chat box. So if you're interested, you are feel free to visit those. And also, if you like to contact Dr. Mario, he has provided his email address. So thank you once again for your wonderful presentation. Now to move to third presentation, we have Dr. Norbu Wangdi from Bhutan. Dr. Norbu is the project coordinator with the Royal Society for Protection of Nature in Bhutan. By the way, the Royal Society for Protection of Nature, or RSPN, is the pioneer non-governmental organization in Bhutan. Prior to this, he served as the Chief Forestry Officer for the Forest Resource Management Division under Department of Forest and Park Services, and also as a chair for the Center for Water, Climate and Environmental Policy at the Uginwangchu Institute for Research and Environment. So you can also find his bit more of his information in the chat box. And he will be presenting us today on the developing nature-based solutions for managing biodiversity landscapes in Bhutan. So I would like to hand over the floor to you. Dr. Norbu, please. I guess you are sharing your presentation. You are also muted. In case if you cannot share, we will be happy to share your presentation from here.
Yeah, maybe some restrictions on recording, so maybe the organizers can share.
Okay, so we'll share your presentation from here, no problem.
Yeah. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I think when the presentation is on, first of all, thank you very much, the organizers, for this opportunity. Of course, I will share brief experiences from Bhutan. I think not solely related to the activities of RSPN, but overall experiences from Bhutan. And thank you very much. So as you can see, I will my presentation, I think, will focus mostly on the how to NBS for managing biodiversity landscapes in Bhutan, some practical experiences from managing the biodiversity landscapes, particularly in Bhutan at national, as well as some local level experiences. So next, please. This is just to show highlight the state of where we are now today. I think we have talked about climate change having a lot of cascading effects on the ecosystems, communities, and therein. But then I think we all know that climate change is real. But then currently, I think this is a very interesting article saying that I think we have to prepare for the future. I think we have to know more about the cascading global climate failures, I think, in terms of the preparedness for our extreme events, which has, I think, a lot of cascading effects on the ecosystems as well as the communities therein. Next, please. And then I think, as Mario already explained about the NBS, I think as an adaptation option for mitigating the risks of climate extremes, and then overall as a approach for minimizing the effects of climate change. So some examples, next please. So some examples of, I think, NBS applications, practical applications from Bhutan. I think for definitely, I think now everyone knows that Bhutan, I think we have a rich forest cover. I think more than 71% of our country's area is under forest cover. And then enhancing sustainable forest management is one of the practical approaches or application of typical NBS solutions, I think, which we have been applying in Bhutan, I think, wherein we are promoting sustainable management of natural resources, I think, as one of the core priorities of forest management in Bhutan. And we are also encouraging community participation. I think since the 1990s, we have the first communities, and now community forests, I think, which is a very good example of what a real practical application of NBS in Bhutan. I think now we have more than 800 plus community forests. On top of that, I think we are also at a national level encouraging our main priorities on enhancing the water management and restoration of watershed management and restoration of degraded watersheds. Then we are also prioritizing our actions for enhancing forest fire management and rehabilitation of degraded areas, which is also a good example of NBS practical application. Then we are also mainstreaming payment for ecosystem services schemes. I think we have initiated in the past, I think, the national plans to upscale payment for ecosystem services schemes to benefit the communities as well as the ecosystem. And then in the larger sense, benefit the livelihood of the communities. And then I think in more, we are also implementing REDD+ approaches as a NBS scheme in Bhutan. Next, please. Now, as we already saw that Bhutan, I think, has huge forest cover, which is a good reservoir for biodiversity and ecosystem services. But then we also have a strong network of protected areas in Bhutan. I think almost 51% of the countries under the protected areas. And then to enhance further the protection and conservation of wildlife and habitats, I think we have also launched this Bhutan for Life project, I think, which is a 14-year project. I think Project Finance for Permanence initiative, I think US $40 million worth of project we have launched it. And this is another example of a nature-based solution for managing biodiversity landscapes, I think, because we are trying to protect and the major key milestones under this, I think. Next slide, please. We have, in terms of milestones, we have 5 milestones: biodiversity, healthy ecosystems, enhancing climate resilience, enhancing economic opportunities for the communities within the protected areas, and then enhancing the management of protected areas, thereby strengthening and the enforcement as well as management of the protected areas. In terms of biodiversity, we are looking at protecting, saving, and monitoring wildlife and habitats. I think there are also a lot of approaches related to, in the principles of NBS are there. For an example, I think from the Royal Manas National Park, I think this is before, you can see the habitat management, grassland management in before, and then after the interventions through this project, I think there has been huge improvement in the habitats. And then we have also seen these are from the park management pictures, and we've seen wildlife and all using the habitat within the park. So how, I mean, interventions such as habitat management can improve the overall habitat as well as enhance the biodiversity within the park. So this is a very good example of NBS. Thank you. Next, please. Then this is the current project that I'm managing at the Royal Society for Protection of Nature. We are looking at developing ecosystem-based solutions, or NBS, for managing biodiversity landscapes in Bhutan, particularly in terms of enhancing the conservation of this white-bellied heron. I think it's one of the most critical endangered species as per the IUCN, and we have about less than 60 individuals globally. So I think this is a huge task for us, I think, to save this species, globally threatened species. Next, please. The whole approach, I think, is based on landscape ecosystem approach. So we are trying to look at ecosystem types, what are the ecosystem services, and then based on the analysis of the situation of the ecosystem through an integrated approach called as ecosystem and socioeconomic resilience analysis mapping, we are trying to introduce this integrated approach for planning and enhancing biodiversity conservation in Bhutan. So we are trying to identify it, and then ultimately our goal is to enhance the conservation of white-bellied herons and other associated biodiversity within the project landscape. Thank you. Next, please. In terms of strategic interventions under this project, I think these are mostly based on NBS or ecosystem-based solutions. In terms of, we have 5 strategic interventions under this: biodiversity conservation or enhancing WBH conservation, then livelihood enhancement and resilience, enhancing climate resilience, then knowledge sharing and networking. Under biodiversity conservation, I think we are looking at restoring degraded WBH habitats. Then we are also focusing on monitoring the species itself, white-bellied herons, and through an citizen science approach. In terms of livelihood enhancement and resilience, we are looking at building climate-smart agricultures within the communities, building agroecological landscapes, mitigating human-wildlife conflicts, and then other livelihood options such as community-based fishery, then promotion of sustainable ecotourism, nature-based tourism within the communities, within the project landscapes. And then in terms of enhancing climate resilience, I mean, ensuring water security, water supply for the communities, and then also building agroecological landscapes, community-based nurseries. I think these are all part of the nature-based solutions. Then we have knowledge sharing and networking. I think experience sharing from this implementation. And then, as I told earlier, we are also trying to look at introducing this integrated approach through this SRAM, and then sharing our experiences in the global platforms such as the CBD Corps. Thank you. Next, please. Next, please. Then another activity that's also at RSP, and what we are looking at is enhancing black-neck crane conservation in Bhutan. I think managing the habitats for, and some of the strategic interventions under this project are stakeholder coordination, research and monitoring in terms of then provision of alternative sustainable livelihoods, education and awareness, habitat management, I think in the critical black-neck crane habitats, then promoting community stewardship through stakeholder engagement. These are all the strategic interventions that we have. Thank you, please. Some successful NBS applications, I think we have provision of solar lighting systems to communities in Pobjika, promotion of sustainable natural resource management, then installation of underground electric cables. I think only wetland in Bhutan where you can, where you can enjoy the beauty of the scenic beauty of nature without the disturbance of electric poles. I think that's, in one way, healthy wildlife or the black-neck cranes, I think, because it reduces mortality of black-neck cranes. And then we have also initiated ecosystem Pobjika through this since 2003, and then now this wetland is also declared a Ramsar site, an international wetland of international importance. Thank you very much. Next, please. Next, please. Then the Bhutan Ecological Society, sorry. Under the, this is, I think, work in progress, but WWF Bhutan and the Royal Government of Bhutan has also started implementing living landscapes So another NBS, I think, example, the Bhutan Ecological Society, another civil society organization in collaboration with the Royal Government of Bhutan, has launched this Million Tree projects. I think the main objective is to promote ecologically and economically productive landscapes, which would also serve as community carbon banks in the long run. I think the main objective is to enhance community livelihoods while nurturing the environment. So basically, we are trying to plant trees, economically valuable tree species in all the abandoned or fallow lands in the communities in Bhutan. Next, please. Through another project, Living Landscapes, securing high conservation values in South and Western Bhutan, a 8-year project implemented by WWF Bhutan and the Royal Government of Bhutan. I think this project looks at securing biodiversity and ecosystem services outside the project area system through identification of high conservation value areas within the project landscape. And then here we have already developed the national interpretation for high conservation value areas in Bhutan. And by 2028, at least, I mean, the target is to identify high conservation value areas within the project landscapes in Bhutan. Next, please. Well, there was just a brief update on what kind of NBS applications or practical actions that we have undertaken under various projects in Bhutan at national level, as well as at the local level. So, and then at RSPN, I think these are the major focus areas of RSPN. And if you're interested to support our work, please do so. Please join our Facebook and also we have a membership page on our website. So please do join us. Karinche, and thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Norbu, for your presentation, sharing your experience from Bhutan on various kind of NBS initiated there, benefiting both biodiversity and also the human well-beings. So thank you once again for sharing your rich experience. And now, also just as a reminder, I would like all the participants to kindly put your question in the chat box. I've already seen Professor Takehito answering one question, so thank you for that. And now the fourth presentation we have is from Mr. Joost Nodemer, who is from the Netherlands, and he's a coastal engineering team lead based in a company called Withaven Bos, based in Jakarta in Indonesia. So Mr. Joost is a specialized in water management, hydrodynamics, and morphology. As a consulting engineer in fault defense, he has contributed to design of several large dikes, reinforcement, and new construction projects in Netherlands. Now, I think most of you would agree that there are some wonderful dikes that you can see in the Netherlands. But now he is based in Jakarta, Indonesia, involving large-scale coastal protection and restoration studies, building with nature. So his presentation will be on ecological mangrove restoration in Demak in Indonesia. So I would like to welcome Joost for his presentation, please.
Hi, thank you all for having me in your webinar and allowing me to present our recently completed ecological mangrove restoration project in Demak. So we've had some really nice presentations by the previous speakers, I think, about a wide variety of nature-based solutions, applications, and policies that can be implemented. And in this presentation, I would like to dive deeper into a specific case. So we have one specific pilot project that I would like to go through that we implemented in Indonesia from as a nature-based solutions or building with nature perspective. I will share a little bit about the consortium of partners that made this this project possible and how it was set up, some of the project background, the problems we were trying to solve, and then ultimately what solutions we implemented, how we learned throughout this project, as it was a pilot project trying to develop and hone the measures that we were implementing. And finally, also saying a little bit about ownership at a local level regarding the implemented measures and the challenges we faced and how we can upscale them through landscape propositions. I'll try to finish all this in one go, but it's I noticed that I will be pressed for time. So EcoShape is a consortium that exists or was created by a combination of knowledge institutes and engineering firms, governments, contractors, and various NGOs in the Netherlands. They partnered up to develop pre-competitive knowledge. So it was aimed at developing and implementing projects that through learning by doing would grant us or give us best use practices of certain nature-based solutions or building with nature measures, which we then in each or through each project translated to practical design guidelines that are shared and made publicly available to anyone who wants to access them. And I would recommend all people who are interested in finding these guidelines, also from this project, to go to ecoshape.org, which is the website where all these projects and their relevant documentation can be found. So the Demak district is where we did our big pilot project in Indonesia. It is located on the island of Java at the star shown in the overview map of Indonesia. It's a small area which has an ongoing coastal erosion problem. You can see it in the satellite picture also how far the sea reaches land inwards. And if we look at it through time, then you also see that the coastline has really retreated back quite far. So the coastline used to be quite stable at the outset, and it moved back quite far for various reasons. So some primary reasons here are that the land was continually being developed as aquaculture land. So fish ponds were being dug here, and for that, the natural buffer zone, the mangrove zone, was being cut down and removed, replaced by small ponds that have no capacity to stop extreme weather conditions or stronger weather conditions. Additionally, there's just natural patterns of sediment migration and land subsidence, which also exacerbated the problem here. This is the situation in a lot of these places. So you see here in the picture above also some foundations still of housing, and this is quite a normal site. These pictures are not taken during very high tides, but this occurs on a daily basis through the normal tidal cycle. So the situation is very dire. And in the past, a lot of problems or a lot of solutions were already implemented. Traditionally, the hard structures, and it was found that these they don't really work as they sometimes even make the situation worse by having a lot of wave reflection. But they also led to a lot of social resistance because the local fishermen could no longer easily park their boats or moor their boats at the coastline. Taking them or removing part of their livelihood, basically. So we set up in 2012 already a Building with Nature project in Indonesia that was called Securing Degraded Coastlines for Rehabilitation and Revitalization of the North Coast of Java. And it was instituted through an MOU with two ministries in Indonesia, the Ministry of Fisheries and the Ministry of Public Housing, together with EcoShape, the consortium of all Dutch partners, and one of the primary NGOs in that consortium, Wetlands International, who have a very strong Indonesian presence. There are a lot of big components to this, so I will try to go through this individually. But at the onset, there were two forces that were at odds with each other, and that was the coastal protection, so the coastal safety measures, and the aquaculture, so the communities trying to earn their living and maintain their livelihood. And those two things were approached by performing a system analysis to see how we can implement certain structures that we had already developed in the Netherlands, semi-permeable structures, to trap sediment and allow mangroves to reclaim their land. And at the same time, those mangroves would, because of the social situation, be cut down and transferred to fish ponds again. So we also implemented a sustainable aquaculture practice, and we instructed the local communities on how to sustainably farm fish, leading to very successful results. They had over I think 3 times more profit at most of their fish ponds, also expanding the scope of the pilot to almost all members of the community because they saw how successful it was. And these 2 measures were implemented by a variety of organizations depending on their skill. And we as Witte Vener Bos, for example, were briefed with the technical detailing and implementation of the permeable structures that I will relate in a bit. Simultaneously, also at a larger scale, at the national scale, we tried to perform capacity building by training various people at universities and government institutes to understand how these nature-based solutions or the building with nature approach can be used and implemented on a larger scale. In total, I think we trained over 70 trainers that went out to train their pupils, and reaching nearly 3,000 people, while simultaneously being in constant collaboration with the government to embed building with nature solutions into the national policy as coastal protection, because that's often one of the barriers stopping these measures from working. The final pillar of this project was to scale it up along similar coastlines in Indonesia. We've done this together with the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries. They have replicated our permeable dam structures over 15 kilometers in Indonesia and of coastline, and we also developed landscape propositions, so other pilot projects that can be that are used as a spark to develop new projects in the future. The project goals were to reverse basically the coastal erosion that took place. So the 2013 situation was taken as the baseline, and we wanted to go to the dream scenario with a strong green mangrove belt at the forefront that could take storms, that had a dynamic character and restored basically the natural ecosystem. We wanted to achieve this through adaptive management, so we wanted to learn each year from the data we gathered and the cycle we went through with maintenance, implementation, construction, data analysis, etc. And we wanted to upskill this through Indonesia, obviously, and we wanted also to, through these capacity building sessions, train the Indonesian young engineers mainly in using these measures for future projects and other practices. The initiative of the permeable structures came from the fact, as I showed, that high wave reflection caused more issues did more harm than they solved problems. So the idea was to allow a more dynamic sediment transfer in the buffer zone that allowed for changing conditions. And the permeable structures, they allow through some wave energy carrying sediment, but then depositing it right behind the structures as the wave energy goes down. The second reason for implementing permeable structures, as we implemented them here, is that they're very low tech. So they are easy to implement by local communities, even though they are, they require a lot of understanding of the system, but you can implement them quite easily once you know where you need to place them. And the project was developed so that these permeable structures would be built out in phases of 100 meters at a time, reclaiming land, or claiming land basically by promoting sedimentation. And the goal of the sedimentation was to create the natural conditions where mangroves can grow out again. So where mangroves automatically restore through natural propagation. And you can see that on the right side, how these structures are phased out in steps with the sedimentation right behind and the open sea in front. And through this, as I said, we did it through an adaptive management style where we had a yearly cycle, and we performed a lot of research throughout the project and tried to, for example, in this case, improve the structures that we were using. So on the left side are the structures that we transposed from a Netherlands situation. They didn't have bamboo there, but they were fairly filled with brushwood and effective at catching sediment. But we found that they were relatively expensive to begin with, but also that there was still a lot of loading from the brushwood from wave attack on the back row of bamboo pillars. So we tried to change that by implementing different types of structures, and you will notice that we have a pole row in the middle, or we created a fence-like structure on the right-hand side, and each of these different structure types was implemented in the field and tested to see if the sedimentation rates were the same, if they had better lifetimes, if they were better resistant against other elements, for example, shipworm, which was a big problem for the natural elements. So these this yearly cycle was gone through for 6 years in total, really allowing us to improve the designs at the location. And these are just some pictures to show you the results of the sedimentation. So on the left-hand side, each time you see the open sea, and on the right-hand side, the sedimentation caused by the permeable structures, because they reduce the incoming wave attack. And so the second step was for this mangrove restoration to commence, and we have seen varying results on this also across Indonesia. We're still investigating this exactly why at some places it works better than at others, but overall you see that natural recruitment of these mangroves is better than planting, because we find that if they recruit naturally, we at least know that the conditions for the mangroves are correct, and otherwise they will die off anyway. And here you see natural recruitment of mangroves behind these permeable structures. And as I said, it was used as a knowledge development project. So we started all the way back in 2012 with only a very small dam, and that was expanded up to 3 kilometers of dams in this pilot project with different setups, different types of structures, different orientations. And each year we did an analysis cycle of sedimentation rates and boundary conditions and how it would model and where the sediment was coming from. But we also performed testing on the materials, for example. You may have noticed in some of the pictures that there was a carpet around the bamboo poles, and that carpet was there to keep the shipworm out. And later we even shifted to, in some cases, PVC material, because the shipworm was so detrimental to the function of the structures. And at the moment, there's an ongoing research project still in the same area where we're trying to find a sustainable method of financing these structures, because they are low tech, but the material costs are still significant for the local communities. And by combining it, for example, what we're trying in this research project is to combine it together with mussel growth, where the mussels can be harvested and the profits from that can be used for the maintenance of these structures. As I said, we developed a number of guidelines in this project that are available for everyone to use. They can be found on ecoshape.org. They range from what the approach is about and how you can perform a system understanding assessment to design conditions for these permeable structures and an assessment of materials, and even how these field schools or how this aquaculture was improved. So I would suggest anyone who's interested to go to this website and check out these guidelines. And another one that I was triggered by also by Mr. Balzan is that he says ownership of these projects is very important, and that was also the case here in the MAC. And for that reason, because the communities, if they have no ownership with these structures, they would not allow them to stay in their areas, because the area is also very valuable sea and where they have a lot of easy to catch fish. So 2 or 3 years before the end of the project, we transferred the structures to the communities and gave them ownership of these structures. And that was really appreciated by them. And from that point on, the communities themselves, they were tasked through a bioright system to maintain these structures on a yearly basis and even construct new ones if so desired. And all that the project at that point onwards was support them in their design decisions, but also in the financing of the materials. But the labor costs and everything else had to come from the communities themselves. And this was very successful, I think, in the end, in embedding the permeable structures in the communities. This is an image of the four community group of the four community heads on the left-hand side during the signing ceremony with their community groups that were tasked with maintaining these structures. So some challenges I already mentioned throughout the presentation, but we had a big subsidence problem, especially in the southwestern side of the project area, where land subsidence was significantly higher than we anticipated at the start of the project, which counteracted a lot of the consolidation and sedimentation. It was at land subsidence rates of nearly 10 centimeters per year, so it was quite significant. And the shipworm also especially in the beginning, before we understood where the deterioration was coming from, had a big impact on the structure integrity. Then, as a final step of this project, we developed landscape propositions for 5 different locations in Indonesia, where we try to integrate as much as possible the building with nature approach and nature-based solutions to solve certain challenges, most of the time water challenges in a certain area. And an example of the results of that here is an identification of possible projects that could help in alleviating water stresses. So, and we set this up for these cities, and we hope now to develop these further into projects with financing, etc. And this is an overview slide, but each one of you can find this information also in the final report of our project of what we have achieved. So a lot of people were benefited from this. We had a large area of mangroves was reclaimed, many kilometers of dams constructed, and I recommend anyone who wants to know the background of these figures to take a look at that report. And with that, I think I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very much, Joost, for your presentation. It's very nice to hear about your experience from Indonesia on mangrove restoration. I think mangrove restoration has been one of the most practical and most widely used nature-based solutions, especially to adapt to climate change in the coastal region, especially in the Southeast Asia. So thank you so much for sharing your experience on that. And now we have our 5th presentation. It's perhaps the last presentation, but of course not the least presentation we have today. We have Mr. Rafael Clement, who is a Senior Program Officer from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, for water and wetlands in Asia. And he is the regional focal for nature-based solutions. As you know, that IUCN has been really pioneering on this nature-based solution. So he's the focal for Asia. He has more than 30 years of experience working on environmental conservation for government, NGO, and various organizations in more than 13 countries in Asia, Europe, and South America. So today, he will be presenting us on locally led nature-based solutions experience from South Asia, that is from the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna basins. So I would like to welcome Mr. Rafael for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pourba, and thank you all, and thanks to the presenter that presented before me for a very interesting presentation. So my name is indeed Rafael. I work at the IUCN. I think the logo appears upside down. My communication team wouldn't be very happy with that, but it says IUCN International Union for Conservation of Nature. I'm based in Bangkok, where we're currently facing a huge storm, and I'm by the window, so I hope you can hear me because it's quite a bit of noise. And I will present today on a work we did in documenting nature-based solution implemented at local level by civil society organization or communities in the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna, so covering these basins in India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, but also China. So looking really at the leadership of local level in terms of implementing nature-based solution for water mainly, or for basin restoration. Next one. So I think probably Mario presented the definition at the beginning. I will just repeat it. So it's good to hear it again and again. Definition of IUCN for nature-based solution, which is actions on ecosystems. So you can protect, sustainably manage, or restore natural but also modified ecosystem. You do that to tackle a societal challenge. We can be climate change, food and water security, natural disaster, health as well, and others. And you do that to receive human well-being and at the same time biodiversity benefits. Allow me to emphasize on that because I think that's one of the key gaps we see in a number of nature-based solutions that are really designed only looking at the benefits we will get out of it, but not thinking necessarily also in really clearly identifying expected biodiversity benefits. So this definition has been adopted by IUCN members in 2016 at the Congress of our members, the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii. And it was followed more recently by a slightly revised definition from the UN Environment Assembly this year, which is largely inspired by IUCN one, but expands a little bit on some of the terms. So I'm presenting the IUCN one, which I find a bit more condensed. Next one. So I will present basically the results of the report you have on the right. I realize that maybe the slides appear very small, but I'll take you through some of the key elements, and I'll share also the link to the report. So this study and this assessment was done as part of a work we have in the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna, where we work with a network of civil society organizations that are engaged directly, indirectly, primarily or secondarily in managing water or rivers in the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna basin. So CSOs that are working in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in India, in Bhutan, and also in China. So we started by a number of consultations and discussions on nature-based solutions for adaptation or ecosystem-based adaptation, and really discussing what were the work of those CSOs or communities partner on the ground, and initiated a process to document those solutions. So the objective of this assessment and documentation was to first kind of promote the incredible work that is led by civil society organization, indigenous people organization, and communities at local level. Also to identify possible gaps in how we could strengthen their solution, and really kind of draw lessons learned from all these experiences across borders to then approach governments, showing that a lot already is happening on the ground, and providing avenues for upscaling. So we had several dialogues, specific support to CSOs for them to document their lessons learned. And we received 15 case studies, and out of that we selected 7 that were very strong on nature-based solution that we decided to document further and compile in a document. So as part of the process, we also, no, I will stay on the first, sorry, on the one before. Just the slide before, if you can come back, or I can just talk about it. So as part of this process, we also assessed this solution against the recently adopted nature-based solution standard, which was developed and endorsed by IUCN members in July 2020, and which kind of provide a framework for the design, the implementation, and the monitoring of nature-based solution. So the idea was to look at how local experience match with the standard and how we could use the standard to provide specific recommendations. The results were disseminated in a number of regional, national, and global webinars, including the last World Conservation Congress of IUCN in Marseille in 2021, and engaging a large number of networks, CSOs, youth group, indigenous people organizations. So I will present very quickly 4 case studies and then present some of the key learnings from all of that against the assessment of the NBS global standard. Next one, please. So the first example is in Bangladesh, in Al Hor, which is a wetland, a large wetland ecosystem located in the north, in northeast Bangladesh. And this large area includes a variety of land use types: wetlands, swamp forests, marshes, and agricultural fields. For 7 or 8 months of the year, most of the area of the wetland is flooded, and it extends to around 13,000 hectares in the peak of the monsoon. And then in dry season, we move to a network of much smaller wetlands, ranging from 2 hectares to 100 hectares. Al Hor provide habitats for more than 70 indigenous fish species, also wintering ground for rare and endangered migratory bird species. And it also, and very importantly, support the livelihood of more than 170,000 people living in 60 villages around the wetlands. So that's quite significant for one wetland only. Agriculture and fisheries are the main source of livelihood, which also cause conflicts in terms of water and ecosystem use. So a number of issues were identified by CSOs working at local level. The declining of ecosystem and degradation of ecosystem and their services through overexploitation, land use change, promoting conversion of perennial wetlands for agriculture and aquaculture, an increasing rate of sedimentation of the wetlands due to the forest degradation and intensive agriculture practice on the hill, on the slope upstream. Also an increase in rice cultivation area of the year, and over extraction of water being a source of conflict, as I just said, between farmers and fishermen. In terms of governance, there was a lack of community engagement in the management of the wetland that was mainly led by local government. The community didn't have the right to fish in the wetland, and fishing was allowed through annual leasing of the wetlands for fisheries to the highest bidder, which kind of excluded often communities from fishing and accessing. So CSOs in the sites, namely the CNRS, decided to initiate a project to restore the wetland with a long-term objective to really restore livelihoods and benefits from the wetlands for local communities, and move the management from something that was very government-owned or rich household-owned to something that was more community and led and inclusive. So they led a number of consultations with local communities, farmers and fishermen, to document the main challenge and solution, which I just presented. They did what is very interestingly, a study of the ecosystem services, valuation of ecosystem services provided by the wetlands, and they identified that the wetlands provided an equivalent of $8 million per year in 2000, and then they followed by further assessment in the year after. On the management, they advocated jointly with the community for a lead for communities to manage the bill. So moving from the higher bidder to something that was automatically given to communities through a joint communities management. And this was secured for 10 years and hopefully will be renewed. They established also governance system with the resource management organizations, RMOs, and capacity building on wetlands management to really ensure that this new governance was empowered and had the capacity to lead the activities on wetlands. In terms of technical activities, several activities were implemented through desilting, so basically digging softly some part of the wetland to reconnect it to the river and increase its storage capacity, reintroduction of native plant, fish species, the management of exotic species as well. They also established protected areas, no fishing zone to manage the resource and really make sure that the ecosystem services from the wetland were well managed and protected. And they also worked with the farmers to improve agricultural practices around the wetland, to reduce the runoff, the pollution and silting, and to also to reduce the water use. So this led to clear results in terms of enhancement of ecosystem services, with the monitoring that shows that we move from this 8 million in 2000 to 10.5 million at the end of the project, so a significant increase, and an increased production and consumption of fish, which has been reported by community with an increase of 33%. Also important, and I think this is really something we like to emphasize on as we develop nature-based solution, the governance approach, of course, was strengthened with the strengthening of the community rights over wetlands and the management of protected areas. So really something that is now led by communities with a number of community funds that are supporting the activities in the long term beyond the project duration. So we feel that's a very good example. Next one. So the next one takes us to Nepal. And looking this time at how nature-based solution can be integrated within linear infrastructure or more gray infrastructure, a bit of the hybrid approach between nature-based solution and gray infrastructure. So we're here in the context of course, a mountainous country, a Himalayan country, with all a network of rural earthen roads made of soil that are very important for local communities. These roads have increased by more than 15 times from 1998 to 2016, and they're often constructed by the communities with a bit of support from local government, but really without formal engineering assessment and design. As a result, the roads are often closed for months because they face landslides, accumulation of debris that impact the household located close to the road and really limit their transportation and impact their livelihood. So this required annual reconstruction with large investments to clear the debris and to keep them operational. So as part of a global IUCN project named Ecosystem Protecting Infrastructure and Communities, EPIC, that lasted from 2012 to 2017, we work with communities to support and CSO to support them in initiating pilots to reduce the landslide vulnerability of the local communities in Three Hill district in the Gandaki province. And this pilot really demonstrated the value of ecological engineering approach in simultaneously reducing the risk of an landslide by creating eco-safe roads and generating additional income for local communities. So there's been a number of technical approach that look at the application of slope stabilization measures, such as construction of low-cost drainage canal along the road to ensure the water flow from upstream to downstream, dry stone protection wall, and plantation of trees and grass along the road to stabilize the slope, but also keeping in mind the multi-benefits of nature-based solution, providing livelihood support, so support to food security and some kind of livelihoods and trade. So plants that were then supported and sold in markets. This went along with capacity building of communities on development of marketable products such as brooms for the broom grass species, fruits, etc. The result has been a substantial reduction in soil erosion and landslide and an additional income for the community coming from the vegetation and the forest restoration along the roads. And this, interestingly, also led to a policy change in Nepal with the adoption in some of the policies and national planning of this approach for mountain roads. So really upscaling nature-based solution from local practice all the way up to national policies. Next one. So the third example takes us now to India in the Datia watershed located in the Bundelkhand region of Madhya Pradesh, where we look at now a watershed of a bit more than 5,000 hectares, which is drained by small seasonal rivers and supports a population of more than 100,000 people. The agriculture there is the main source of livelihood for residents, and they were facing a number of issues, including the increasing population pressure, the demand for agricultural land, which led to a decrease in the tree cover. And this decrease in tree cover contributed to high surface runoff, soil erosion during the monsoon, and very limited non-farm livelihood or income-generating opportunities for local farmers. So very high dependency on farming and degradation of the area. Water is scarce. Women have to travel long distance to fetch water for basic needs. And of course, climate change is adding an additional pressure to this area. So the CSOs there worked on mapping first the land, understanding the land use change and also the need for land, and started building jointly with community the creation of water and soil conservation structure, such as check dams. So again, a hybrid between gray infrastructure in some case, but also nature-based solution. And they implemented a large afforestation or forest landscape restoration program to increase the groundwater level, reduce the runoff, and reduce drudgery for women. They strengthen again this approach on governance with the formation of watershed committee, capacity building on farmers, on improved agricultural practices, and also they built an internal funding mechanism with the creation of a watershed development fund to support in the long term and beyond the duration of the project, the watershed committee. As a result, the greening or forest landscape restoration reached more than 360 hectares of watershed in strategic areas. And we have noticed a 30% enhancement in the average income of farming households due to the improvement in water security and also agricultural practices. Next one, and that will be my last example. So this example, probably Dr. Norbu is very familiar with it, and I think he even mentioned it in his presentation related to payment for ecosystem services in Bhutan. So this case study is not in the report, but we thought it was a very interesting initiative, which was led by the Watershed Management Division of Bhutan jointly with local communities and private sector. So really trying to find ways to support financially sustainable management of watershed and involving the stakeholders upstream, the one managing the watershed, the communities, and the users downstream, mostly tourism sector in Bhutan, so hotels using the water. So they piloted, I believe, in 25 small watershed in Bhutan, payment for ecosystem services mechanisms, where communities had co-developed with government a management plan of the watershed to ensure water provision, to ensure that the ecosystem were in good shape and that the threats were tackled. And in exchange, the private sector using the water, so again, the tourism sector mostly, would pay a fee to the communities for them to continue implementing this management plan. The fee was used for the management plan, so core use for the sustainability of the nature-based solution, but also for other use at community level, like restoring the school and providing support. So that goes way beyond only implementing the management plan. And the support amounts to approximately $2,000 per year per watershed. We thought it was a very good example of how at local level, very small scale mechanisms for sustainable funding of nature-based solutions could be implemented. Next one. Oh, next one, please. Yes. So we did a review and documentation of this case studies. So 7 case studies. I couldn't present them all. And then we assessed them against the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions. So again, this is a standard that has been developed endorsed in 2020 after 2 years of work from IUCN members and partners. And that really aims at providing a guidance on designing, implementing, and monitoring nature-based solutions. I presented it in one of the last webinars with AIT, so maybe some of you have attended that. I won't have the time to go through all of it, but just so you know, it's a set of criteria, 8 criteria that are associated to 26 indicators, and we have developed a tool that takes you through questions and assessments so you can see how well you match each criteria. The point being that for it to be a sustainable or robust nature-based solution, you need to meet the 8 criteria. There's several levels of meeting the criteria. You don't need to be very high always, and we understand some challenges, but this provides some kind of framework and guidance on how to look at nature-based solution, not only on the technical side, but looking at the economic viability, the governance, the trade-off, the adaptive management, how you move your learning to the policy level, along, of course, with some criteria that are a bit more technical. Next one. So we did an assessment of these solutions to try to understand where they could be strengthened, what were their strengths, and what could be the next steps in terms of upscaling them. So I won't have the time to go through the detail of the assessment, but I'll share the link to the reports. So on criterion 1, which look at societal challenge, have we understood and captured the societal challenge and jointly with communities? We thought that these case studies were usually very strong on this criterion because usually the demand came from communities. CSOs have been working and engaging closely with the communities and often based on scientific assessment. In some case, we really had the community view, but it was missing a little bit the science behind the societal challenge, so that could have been a gap. On the second criterion, which is working at scale, are we working at the right scale? Are we making a real impact and tackling the threats? This was a bit of a gap. So of course, community have a limited capacity to intervene on large areas. So we see very local solution that would tackle the threat directly at community levels or on the ecosystems around the community, but not really this approach at scale. I think it does make sense, but that's maybe where governments, international organizations can help communities working together, a network of communities in really expanding the approaches and the measures to a larger scale. On the criterion 3, which looks at biodiversity net gain, interestingly, most of the stories were not looking at biodiversity at all. So it's really about restoring the ecosystem, using the services, and having human benefits. So it doesn't mean that this solution didn't provide biodiversity net gain or biodiversity net benefits, but in any case, it was not documented. The only case where we had a clear documentation on how the approach benefited some species was the hail hore, the first example I presented in Bangladesh. Number 4, economic feasibility. So it really depended on the case. A number of cases didn't have really built financial mechanisms within their program to make it sustainable beyond the support of CSOs or projects. So this could have been a challenge. I think the example from India is a good example of where they have really worked in building those community funds, and hail hore as well in Bangladesh, if you remember. Or the Bhutan example is also a sustainable funding mechanism. On the criterion 5 on governance, most of the solutions rank very high with the establishment or strengthening of community-led mechanisms for governance. You will remember the example of Bangladesh where they worked with really enhancing the rights for fishing for communities. So this was usually very strong, and it also makes sense. Like criterion 1, they're working very closely with communities, and really a big part of the program was really enhancing and strengthening the governance. On criterion 6, trade-off, so looking at who gains and who lose sometimes from nature-based solution and how you can mitigate that. This was a bit of a gap, but in the case of hail hore in Bangladesh, there was really this conflict documented between fisheries and agricultural sector. So additional support provided to agriculture as they were maybe losing a little bit of water resources through the program. So it was really thinking about the stakeholder analysis, stakeholder mapping, and how you balance winner and sometimes short-term loser from nature-based solution. Criterion 7, measuring and evaluating the solutions and providing adaptive management was also often weak. So those were solutions that were developed a little bit ad hoc with not clear indicators developed. So very difficult sometimes to identify clear outcomes, but to also identify things that were not working and that would have needed to be adapted as the project was being implemented. And finally, criterion 8, policy mainstreaming. So how do we take the lessons learned and how we try to mainstream that at government level? This is where I think IUCN and international organizations come into play in really understanding what the CSOs are doing, what the communities are doing, capturing the policy learning and moving that all the way to the decision and policy makers. So we did that, for example, in Nepal, the example I provided, really showing how important those approaches in eco-safe roads were, and that led to the integration within policies. But in a number of cases, we're still talking about very local actions and not really influencing policies yet. Final one, next one, please. So based on this assessment, we provided a few recommendations, and we're now working with some of the CSOs to strengthen the nature-based solution at local level. So clearly one of the approaches to evidence better how this benefits biodiversity. Nature-based solution is not only for human benefits, but for biodiversity benefits. So we support them in establishing clear outcomes, indicators, and processes to document biodiversity net gain. Sometimes there was a lack of stakeholder mappings, understanding the power relationships and how the governance could be sustainable. Financial mechanism, I explained it, depending on the case. Some were very strong, some had no capacity to implement or maintain the nature-based solution beyond the project. Adaptive management, as I said, was also a challenge, and this is one of the points we're strengthening with them. And a bit of a cross-cutting approach was also how we can engage the private sector in nature-based solution in most of the case. So how private sector can be a source of funding, can be a key actors, and they were often left aside in those very local projects because they were more community-led and kind of excluding a potential very important role and positive role of the private sector. The Bhutan case is a very good example where, again, the tourism sector is key in the process and helps supporting communities with the implementation and the funding of watershed management. Next one. So I think that's my last slide. I've been presenting that in just a few minutes. That's a much longer report with 7 case studies that will really take you through the analysis of each case studies and then the comparison to the standards. So I will share the link in the chat, and I'm also very happy to answer any question you may have right now, or feel free to contact me later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Raphael, for your comprehensive presentation on the initiatives in Southeast Asia with regard to water security, wetlands, and all of those issues, and also a bit on the global standard, I think, which is very useful. I think yes, I have attended your talk on the IUCN global standards, and also I would suggest if participants have not seen that global standard, I think there is a link being shared at the moment. I think this is a very good guiding document if you are into embarking on nature-based solution programs or projects. So with this, we end all the presentations, and now it is time for a Q&A session. But however, my task has been made very easy by all the panelists by answering their own questions. So there has been a number of questions raised in the chat box, but all the panelists have answered all the questions. So there is basically no questions. And also it is about the time to close the webinar, but I would like to provide an opportunity to all the speakers if you have any last words to say. If you have any last words to share, then you are welcome. Things that you have not actually included in your presentations or in your answer, you are welcome to say. So I would like to provide you an opportunity for last word. If not, we'll close the webinar. Anyone interested from the panel side? Okay, looks like they've already said whatever they wanted to say for today. So thank you so much once again. And then, as I said, the time is closing up. Now we are going to close this webinar. But before that, I would like to conclude our today's webinar. Thank you everyone for attending. And after hearing all these presentations, it appears that the interest in nature-based solution is growing. There seems to be a robust and growing evidence showing environmental, economic, and social benefits of deploying nature-based solutions. And I would like to draw out some key message from our discussion today. We understand that nature-based solution is a holistic approach in combating climate change, biodiversity loss, and our societal challenges. And it has a wide range of applications such as protection, restoration of nature, and also managing our current land use system. It is said to be cost-effective approach, and it is very important means of achieving our sustainable development goals. In one of the presentations from Dr. Maria, you can actually see that he did an assessment of what kind of sustainable development goals are being achieved by implementing nature-based solutions. We have also learned that nature-based solutions are being applied in disaster risk reduction, for example, in Japan, in sustainable management of resources, biodiversity conservation, such as species conservation, wetland management, ecosystem services, and also ecological engineering, such as green infrastructure and water security, etc. And the important thing again is that nature-based solution is a partnership between people and nature, where indigenous knowledge plays a very vital role. So nature-based solution must start local with communities by understanding the problem they are facing, what solution they are currently implementing, and then what sort of support they want us to support. However, we also learned that there are still a lot of existing gaps in terms of knowledge and policy in taking policies, in taking NBS forward, especially in terms of understanding the value of biodiversity, that is economic valuation, the cost benefit analysis, some of the financing mechanisms, which has also been answered by Rafael in the question in the Q&A box. And also, I think collaboration involving all the stakeholders is very important, especially involving private sectors. So finally, we all know that as the evidence is now very clear that not only are we failing to stabilize our climate or minimize biodiversity loss, but these failures are increasingly creating a problem with poverty and inequality around the globe. And they are severely undermining the developmental gains that we have made so far. And as it is evident that we are driving the state of our natural ecosystem on which we depend to almost to a point of no return, it has become very clear that large-scale and much coherent approaches to tackle global challenges are needed. And one such approach is nature-based solutions. So with this summary, I would like to close this webinar. And once again, we'd like to thank our distinguished speakers very much for your time and sharing your information. Not only this, I've been communicating with the speakers for quite a time, and they've spent so much time working onto it. So we would really like to thank you very much for your time and your knowledge, and also all the participants for your time and effort to join our webinar. We would like to see you in another webinar, and until then, we would like to thank you very much. And before that, I close, and I just forgot that we will be posting a short a link there for the evaluation. So I would like to request all of you to kindly attend that link and tell us how you felt about this webinar and how we will improve it further. So please, before you sign out, kindly fill up that online form. It will just take about 5 minutes. And thank you very much.